Just about this time, Jesus has been now facing Jerusalem. And before he goes and makes his way down toward the journey of Jerusalem, the end of his Galilee ministry, the boys are having trouble. They don't get along very well. And in the first 6 verses of chapter 18, problem number 1 of 3 problems, the desire to be important. The desire to be important, or what I would call, if I were king. Okay? And here's the problem. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Which one of us is going to be in charge when you're gone?" Now, in 17, they were grieved that he was going to go. In 18, they just want to know who's going to get to be in charge. But it's not about Jesus, it's about them. They want to be important. They want to be significant. He calls a child. Child comes before him. "Truly I say to you, unless you're converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." The one I can use the most is the one who doesn't need to be important. The child doesn't even recognize that they're less than others. They're just walking around and they recognize that they need to sit down in the presence of elders. They need to respect. He says, "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. Whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and be drowned into the depth of the sea." He happens to be in the north side of the Sea of Galilee where they make millstones. And he's right by the Sea of Galilee where they would, if you wanted to put somebody in there with a millstone tied around his neck, it'd be a very graphic thing. He says, "Look, I need you to not be important. I need you to not feel like you need to be important." Look, the greatest problem we have in ministry today that I can identify is that ministry people are competitive because they're looking to be important. What I think you need to do is focus on doing what God told you to do. And if you do that, you'll get affirmation through him. And when you get the affirmation through him, you won't be running around trying to be actually better than the other guy. Look at the second problem. And I think the second problem is as big. And that's in verses 7 to 14. Problem number 2 is the desire to take advantage of one another. The desire to get a leg up on other people. What I'll say is the cheating of the naive. So, in order to keep us from taking advantage of one another, Jesus offers a system. Now, let's go back and look at the taking advantage. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. It's inevitable stumbling blocks will come, but woe to the one through whom stumbling blocks come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away from you. It's better for you to enter life crippled or lame than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be cast into eternal fire. He says, look, I don't really want there to be stumbling blocks, but there are going to be. Don't be the guy who does the thing that draws everybody's attention away from me. Don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who tries to get over on somebody else and realizes you're doing what you're doing in order to become important. Don't be that guy. It's better that you got to limp through life than that you walk into life proud of yourself. And then he says, verse 12, what do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that's straying? If it turns out that he finds it, truly, I say to you, he rejoices over it more than the 99 which didn't go astray. The one he loses, he goes and gets and puts on his shoulders, brings it back, and he's more excited about it. He says, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish. My ministry is about seeing not just all the people that don't seem to be needy, but the one who keeps drifting off. Focus on the weak one. Help the one who can't get there. Look for the broken guy. Look for the gal who feels worthless about herself. Go after them because that's where my Father will be found. Now, instead of taking advantage of people, look for the people who are weak and help them to become strong. Stop right there. He gives them a system. Here's the system. First, if your brother sins, verse 15, show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you won your brother. This is how disciples should deal with each other when they observe a brother involved in sin. So what it says is if your brother sins, post it on Facebook publicly in front of everyone and shame them, right? If your brother sins, go to a prayer meeting and gossip about it wildly in front of 50 other people. Right? These are all the methods people use. And they all look so godly. How about this? Don't be willing to publicly criticize anybody until you're willing to privately deal with them first. How about that? Now, I'm not talking about world figures. Don't write a note to President Obama and say, you offended me yesterday when you said this. He's not going to get it, and you're wasting your writing time. I'm talking about real people you really observe, not people you watch on TV. Okay? So the first thing is you confront a brother or sister who has wounded you, but you do this in private and you seek to win them back. That's your objective. Notice the end of verse 15. The objective is to win them back, not to prove them wrong. You're trying to fix the problem, not trying to win the argument. Now the second part is, but if he does not listen to you, and the he is generic, he or she, take one or two with you, so that by the mouths of 2 or 3 witnesses every fact may be confirmed. If one person shares with you an event that they alone saw, do not accept it as truth. If one source on Facebook says that the president goes and kills baby kittens in the White House, don't accept it based on the testimony of one. We are lacking the ability to use our minds now. I keep getting things that are supposedly news that are not. Remember this, if it comes from The Onion, it's a joke, okay? Do you know how many people don't know that? Do you know how many sarcastic sources, satirical sources are out there, and they're wildly, oh no, the next big horror is about to happen. It was a joke. And a lot of them are jokes to make Christians look stupid. Regularly, things are circulated through the news of a new find archaeologically that isn't a new find at all. They're playing a joke on you to make your faith look stupid. That's what they're doing. In other words, don't speak until you check your sources. I've been burned on it. Other people have been burned on it. Everybody you know has been burned on it. Because we grew up in a time where Walter Cronkite told us the news, and what he was actually telling us is what we thought was happening. Now, half the news sources are only telling you which political party they work for. That's all they're telling you. Okay, so here's what you see in verse 16. If he or she rejects your advance, bring witnesses to establish that they refuse to repair the relationship. That's the point of the witnesses. The witnesses are not there for extra counselors. They're there to watch what happens and say, yes, this person really did offer to make it right, and this person really did reject it, and we observed that. Does that make sense? Then, verse 17. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the ecclesia. I know ecclesia is translated church, but it's not. He doesn't only use the word in that way, and there is no church when Jesus said it. The church hadn't been started yet. So he says, take it to those who are called out, the called out ones. If they refuse to listen to you, bring a chosen group of people to arbitration for the conflict. This isn't stand up in church on Sunday morning and tell everybody that they weren't willing to make it right. That's not what this is. There are people who are marked out in the community for arbitration. Take it to them with sufficient evidence. And then, if he still refuses to listen to arbitration, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. In other words, mark that guy as somebody you cannot trust and do not do business with him. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. In other words, your judgment through arbitration in the body will be exactly my way of showing you what's really happening. I will make it clear from heaven that that's what's happening. Now, this really works with roommates. It works with everybody, okay? When you see somebody who's overtaken in a sin, and if they are coming at something that is offensive, first thing you want to do is win them. And to win them, you have to lay yourself down and say, I really want you to know that I haven't told anybody about this, but I saw this happen the other day, and I need you to tell me, is there a problem? Do we need to work something out here? I think that if you'll follow this, what you'll find is that there will be a number of the brothers that are led back to you. Now in verse 18 it says God's going to honor the restrictions. In verse 19 and 20, God's going to hear the agreement of the witnesses. He says, again I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything that they may ask, it shall be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. For where there 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in their midst. Would you please mark next to verse 20 that the context of this is not every time there's church I show up. That's not what he's saying. He says whenever you're in trouble and you arbitrate the situation, the people who are there to arbitrate the situation, I will come and be there. If you will pray and seek me and seek to make this right, I will show up and help you do that. This is more about when two believers can't get along and get all the way to the elders' room and they're still arguing with each other. The elders go before God and say, Lord, we need your wisdom, and he says, I'll be there. This is not, well, you know, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered together, I show up in their midst. That's not the context of what he's saying. He's not saying 3 Christians at a Dunkin' Donuts means Jesus is there. Okay, but that's the way people use this verse. The fact of the matter is, Jesus is there when the 3 believers aren't there. That's got nothing to do with it. That's not what he's saying. Am I making sense? Okay. The reality of the situation is there's a third problem. And the third problem that comes up is really in verses 21 to 25. The third problem is that some people can't let go. Some people won't let go of the hurt brought by somebody else. They want to hold on to the hurt. It marks them in everything they do in that relationship. Jesus had straight talk about an instruction to the disciples that they had to surrender life, but they not only had to surrender life, they could also surrender hurt. Today's anger and hurt becomes tomorrow's bitterness. And tomorrow's bitterness, once it takes root, will go out and defile many. It's very hard to come to God over and over with a tender heart when you're bitter toward others, because you're going to suffer the problem of not being able to ask God for forgiveness when you won't forgive them. So in verse 21, the problem is we want to set a limit on the number of times that we have to forgive people. Does everybody see the limit? We want to set a limit. I would put next to that verse, we want to set a limit. In verse 21, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him, Peter says. Pete says, wait a minute. I have to keep forgiving him? When am I done? And when am I off the hook? That's a classic rabbinic statement. You can only have to go this far and then you're done. You're off the hook. And Jesus says something that's not nice at all. God doesn't let us set a limit. God says you don't get to. You have to forgive them more times than you can count. And for this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he begun to settle them, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. But since he did not have the means to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold along with his wife and children and all that he had, and the repayment to be made. In other words, the king ordered that he go to a debtor's situation that is appropriate, the appropriate thing for what he had done. So the slave fell to the ground. He prostrated himself and said, have patience with me, I will repay you everything. It's not that he denied that he owed it to him. It's not that he denied that he was going to pay it. It's that he didn't have it that day. And he said, oh God, please. Now the Lord of the slave felt compassion and released him and forgave him his debt. One of the slaves went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him a few hundred denarii, a few hundred days' wages. He seized him. He began to choke him, saying, pay back what you owe. So his fellow slave fell to the ground and began to plead with him, have patience and I will repay you. He did exactly what the other guy did. But this guy says, no, throws him in prison until you pay back what you owe. When the fellow slaves saw what was happening, they went to the master and said, Master, did you know what he did? And the master, he came to him and he said, why didn't you have mercy the way I had mercy on you? His Lord was moved with anger, handed him over to the torturers until he would repay all that he owed him. He said, my Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart. What does he say? You owe your brother compassion because you got mine. You owe your brother forgiveness because you got mine. You owe your brother mercy because you got mine. Stop asking for mine if you won't give them yours. You don't have the right to come to me and ask to be forgiven of your sin if you will not forgive what they did to you. You must forgive. It's not your choice. Don't think that what they did to you was worse than what you did to me, says Jesus. What you did to me was worse than what they did to you. You say, well, wait a minute, Jesus, that's not true. You don't know how they abused me. Jesus says, and you don't know how you abused me. Don't make your sin small and theirs big. That's not the way it really is.